Welcome to Real Chat with Kat, the podcast that's all about real conversations for real transformation. I'm your host, Kat Polsinelli, professional speaker, MC, and best-selling international author. Here, we tackle the tough stuff, the mud that we all have found ourselves in. We talk about the pivots, the challenges, and the victories that shape our lives and our businesses. From overcoming trauma and finding your voice to navigating life's unexpected twists, we get raw, honest, and open. You'll hear from inspiring guests who share their stories of resilience, healing, and growth. Whether it's breaking through emotional abuse, embracing self-worth, or thriving in entrepreneurship, you'll find connection, empowerment, and the tools to keep you moving forward. So grab your favorite drink, settle in, and get ready for stories that hit home and conversations that make a difference. Let's get real together. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining me today on this episode of Real Chat with Kat. I'm so excited to have you here with me today, and oh, do I have a stellar guest. I was so excited the first time that Eric and I met and went through all this. Anyone that's been listening to this podcast knows that I love when we dive into the brain and the neurology of it and how we can keep ourselves healthier the way it works best for us versus just the way that a doctor prescribes or something like that. And I feel like Eric kind of melds both of those together. So I'm super excited to bring him to the podcast today. Eric, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you. I love your energy, Kat. It's awesome to be with you.
Thank you. Thank you. We're going to have so much fun. So I'll let you do the introduction of yourself and all of the wonderful things that you're doing. So please tell everybody who you are and what it is that you are doing.
Well, I'd say fundamentally who I am is a lifelong learner. I'm a guy that just loves to learn about all sorts of different things. And I spend a lot of time learning about the brain. So I spent 16 years running assisted living and memory care communities. And then 9 years ago, I started a company called The Mind for All Seasons. And we leverage the explosion of current research to help thousands of people across the country optimize their cognitive and mental health. So we work with people of all different ages, everyone from teenagers that are having mental health challenges to maybe adults that are experiencing brain fog and it's disrupting their work, to professional athletes that are dealing with concussions and traumatic brain injuries, to soldiers, to the elderly. We have a whole suite of services that support older adults that have neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. So if it relates to the brain, my team and I love to learn about it, but even more so, we love to do things to help people improve and reverse symptoms to whatever degree possible and identify the root causes of what they're dealing with.
Oh, I love this. And here's the key part, the root cause, right? I don't think that we in our Western medicine tend to talk about the root cause. We're really looking for that Band-Aid, whatever that quick fix is, whatever can get us back out on the road so we can do what we need to do. And then we wonder why after a while it starts coming back, right? That medication has to be bumped up or it has to be changed or something else has to be done. And it's because we're not paying attention to that root cause that I wish that we had more of a conversation around. So in your opinion, when you're looking at all these different items, because you're working from young all the way up to older, what are some of those root causes that you tend to run into?
Oh, that's a great question. Um, there's a lot that we could unpack, and I just have to say up front, we'll tell you at the end of this how to get access to way more
Yeah,
information because there's no way that we can talk through all of the
definitely.
details of this. But one of the biggest issues that I think is affecting all of us, to be a little bit technical, is called hyperinsulinemia. It's too much insulin in the blood. And that's a
Oh.
direct contributor to everything from heart disease to Alzheimer's disease, to the obesity epidemic, to all sorts of issues that we're facing in society. And the number one thing that we can do to shift that is to go back to not being so confused about what to eat. It's only been in about the last 60 years that humans have scratched their heads and said, what am I supposed to eat? What can I eat to get good results? Earlier
Hmm.
generations of humans didn't wonder so much. we just ate real food, and that's a good place to start. So that's one root cause. And certainly we see a lot of nutrient deficiencies and wonkiness that comes from that. I think another root cause kind of issue is the fact that there are 80,000 plus chemicals that didn't exist just a few decades ago. And so there's more of a drag on our systems as humans. The detox pathway through the liver is taxed more than it's ever been. And that can affect people. And I think when you combine some of the genetic issues that are common, that maybe didn't affect earlier generations of humans because they didn't have to deal with quite so much as far as neurotoxic substances, that now you see an expression of problems that it is just really wrecking people in huge numbers. When you and I were kids, Kat, nobody in elementary school had allergies. There was like that one
No.
random kid in school that had a peanut allergy and everybody knew about it. And now it's like a third to a half of these classes have kids with all sorts of lists of dietary requirements and, hey, I
Yeah.
can't eat this because I've got an autoimmune condition. We've seen an explosion of these kinds of things. And that's not a genetic issue. Genes don't change that fast. That's an environmental issue that increasing numbers of people are recognizing and that we need to address. And the last thing that I would say, not to get too long-winded in answering your question, but as far as root cause issues, there's a whole bunch of lifestyle factors. And I think the ease of modern life is killing us. I like how Dr. Benjamin Bickman put it once. He called it the plagues of prosperity. So we
Ooh.
live in climate controlled homes and we drive in climate controlled cars and we go to climate controlled offices. So we don't have to deal with fluctuations in temperature. And you can live on the gas station diet. You won't live well, you'll have chronic disease ultimately, but we don't have food scarcity. We sometimes have a scarcity of real food and really good food, but we're living very differently than other generations of humans. So, if I was to throw out a quick list of lifestyle factors that we could unpack and talk through, it's things like what are we doing to stimulate the brain? What about our physical activity? What are we eating? What about our dental health? That's a fun one that lots of people don't realize the connection of. What about sleep? Are we really prioritizing good, deep, restful sleep and understanding the physiology of what goes on during sleep and why it's critical for our cognitive and mental health? And then what about stress? So many people are experiencing more stress, but they forget the number one rule of how to deal with stress, which is when stress goes up, you got to intentionally counterbalance. So the higher you have stress, if you can't eliminate some of it, well, that just means that you need to more intentionally counterbalance on the other side. So all of those things come together. And to tie it up with a little bow, I'd say brain health is never about one thing. It's a multimodal thing. And there's a lot of stuff to pay attention to, which makes it endlessly fascinating. It means that you and I could talk for the next week and still not exhaust the topic. But that's a little bit of what I would just kind of dump out on the table. So we've got our toys out there to play with now, Kat. What,
I know. I'm like,
what do
we
you
can
think
go
we should talk about?
so many different directions. Um, so I think that, oh, good gracious, I want to hit on so many different things. I definitely think that food is a topic that needs to be a conversation.
Mhm.
And then I definitely want to make sure that we really talk about what we're doing on a day-to-day basis, because you and I talked about this before we started about this sedentary space that we find ourselves in and how we are trying to find things to make sure that we're being active and stuff like that, because it's not something that is pushed. Like when I was a kid, I was outside all the time. You didn't come in till, the sun went down and you got yelled at. Whereas we're seeing people sitting a lot more and staring at phones and not doing something. But let's start with food, because I agree with you. And I have gotten stuck on this as well with all the different diets, and you can detox this way and you should be doing this and you should be taking these vitamins. But like half of the vitamins are, you're not actually getting the supplements to begin with. It's just flowing through your system and it's gone. So where do you think that we can start paying attention to, or what should we be ignoring when it comes to talking about nutrition? Because, right, we all know the pyramid, and then we all know we're supposed to have so many fruits and veggies. But then I've also heard about, depending on like your DNA and things like that, can mean that what you think is good for you, which is being pushed, is great for everybody, might not necessarily be great for your body. So you might need to actually focus on something else. And I feel like we're trying to box everyone in to one narrow pathway and say this is what everyone should be doing. And if you were doing that, you wouldn't be fat. And I can't agree with that.
Yeah, I love where you're going with this. So, just to unpack it a little bit, I think what you're describing, Kat, is the problem of nutritional tribalism. And you get people out there who are strong advocates for this diet or that diet. You'll find your people that say everybody should be eating a ketogenic diet. And just look at those Alaska natives, and that's a ketogenic diet. Okay. What about the people that are staunch vegan or vegetarian advocates? And everything in between. I don't have to name all those diets. People see influencers all the time talking about this thing or that thing.
Yes.
And I think there's a big difference between a tribalistic approach toward diet and a principle-based approach. And I'm a bigger advocate of principles. I think
Okay.
they get us further. So at the outset, I would say when it comes to diet, if anyone thinks that there is one diet that every human needs to eat, then they probably don't understand physiology very well. And I know that that's maybe a little bit snarky, but I really do feel that way because my youngest son is 16. And he's running cross country and track. And so he goes out and he trains for, 8 to 12 miles. And he's in a very different metabolic state, both because of age and because how he's running the cellular engine versus an 80-year-old that's been sedentary for the last 50 years, needs to lose 300 pounds, and has advanced cognitive decline that, at least in part, is driven by really high levels of insulin in the system. They're not even in the same metabolic camp.
Hmm.
And then when you throw in the fact that foods that are generally considered brain foods, like I would argue that an avocado is brain food. It's really good, healthy fat. But is it what you need? Is it the right kind of fuel for you? Well, if you've got a problem like mast cell activation syndrome and you're super sensitive to histamines, avocados are a high histamine food, and they might actually light
Huh.
up your immune system, and it might not be what you need. So, to give a few principles for the audience here, Kat, I would say that first of all, the overall goal of any dietary strategy needs to be metabolic flexibility. Can we function as designed? Can we burn fat when it's time to burn fat? Can we burn glucose when it's time to burn glucose? That's got to be fundamental in everything we do. One thing that all the tribalists can agree on is that ultra processed food is an abject failure. It's a disaster. It's the worst experiment that's ever been foisted upon humankind. And it's time that we just ditch that. And everybody agrees on that, that, if something's made in a factory in Alabama and put in a box and stamped with a date that says it can sit on the center of the grocery store shelves for the next 2 years before it has to be removed and it can't be sold anymore, but it's probably still going to be okay for the next 20 years, like a Twinkie or something. Like, I mean, that could sit there till the zombie apocalypse and it's not going to show any signs of mold. Well,
Yep.
everybody agrees, oh, that's not real food. If you leave real food out on the counter, something happens to it and it spoils. So just eat real food is a good place to start for a lot of people. Whatever you do, another principle is we've got to control blood sugar levels. Nobody disputes the fact that elevated blood glucose is really damaging to the tissues of the body. Diabetics go blind and lose limbs, and we have to be really thoughtful about that.
Hmm.
Whatever we do, we need to maintain sensitivity to insulin signaling because when insulin is up, there's a host of problems. Everything from you don't make enough nitric oxide, and so you end up with high blood pressure, and it contributes to heart disease as well as other factors from that high insulin to all kinds of issues. You can't get glucose into the cell to make energy in the brain, and so you get cognitive issues. Um, I think beyond that, the question is, what is my goal? If people would just ask themselves, what am I trying to accomplish with this meal? I think they would get further. So I'll give you a personal example of that. Um, for years, I just made the same mistakes that most people do. I wasn't thoughtful about my diet. I ate decently, but I was eating kind of the standard fare, which had too much carbohydrate in it. And I gained about 30 pounds. By the time I was in my early 30s, I did not feel good. I would fall asleep in the afternoon. I would feel sluggish and tired, and I was struggling to lose weight. And I didn't understand that insulin is the hormone of growth and storage, and I wasn't doing anything to manage that or be thoughtful about that. Well, once I started going all in on brain health and studying this, and I joined forces with our medical director, my business partner, Randy, and he taught me more about this, I realized what I'd been missing. And so I went on a strict ketogenic diet, and I meant to do it for a couple of months because I really wanted to reset the metabolic switch. And it
Hmm.
worked beautifully. In a couple of months, I lost the 30 pounds. I felt better than I felt in years. And so
Wow.
I just kept going. And I found myself 9 months down the road going, well, wait a minute. I want to preserve muscle mass. I don't want to lose a ton of weight here. I need to be thoughtful about this, but I really like how I feel during the workday because I was getting so much more done. I was way more productive and my energy was steady. And so I made a little bit of a tweak. I realized I can shift into more of a state of ketosis during the workday and I can keep my sugars really steady. But in the evening, I can liberalize my diet a little bit and just kind of shift out of it. So often in the evenings, I'll roast some potatoes or I'll have some black rice or I'll have just a little bit more carbohydrate. So I'm not doing anything crazy that gets me into a state of metabolic mayhem,
Hmm.
but maybe a couple of times a week, I eat a little bit of dessert. And I keep things a little bit more liberal in the evening, which makes it more interesting, which makes it more sustainable. But during the workday, I eat a really low carb diet because that works for my body. But then it's typical on a Saturday morning, I might go out and run 5 to 7 miles and come back and lift weights for an hour. And the goal after that is, man, I need to build muscle and I need to recover from that. Well, to build muscle, you got to have protein and you got to have an insulin response. And so I eat a high protein meal with plenty of good naturally formed carbohydrates. So I might eat an apple and I might eat some rice or, there's lots of possibilities. But when I eat that meal within 30 to 60 minutes of the workout, it goes right into muscle production. I feel amazing. And now I'm eating based on the goal for that moment,
Hmm.
which is a different goal than during the workday.
Yeah.
So that's an example of how you might leverage principles. Now, I've probably thrown way too much out there
Oh my
without a
gosh.
response. Let me
I
pause there.
no, no, you're great. And I love this too because this is actually really new for me in regards to, eating for a specific principle in the moment. And I've noticed this of myself as well. Like I am very aware of what I eat during the day because I know that if I have carbs and stuff, I'm going to kind of crash a little bit more in the afternoon. So I'm really aware of making sure that I don't have a heavy load of what I am eating at lunchtime so that I can get through my day and I don't feel like I am like barely making it alive. And I don't want to have energy drinks or coffee or anything like that. Like I want to stay away from that stuff. So this is really interesting, but I like the fact that like what you're saying is we kind of go back to the individual so that you can see what the difference is, right? Because I immediately started thinking about my youngest one who is in ROTC and he's running 5Ks 3 times a week right now, and they're about to start conditioning and their season's about to pick up. And the way that he needs to eat is a lot different from the way that I might eat, which we've been having that conversation in my household. But he's also in a space where he wants to lift weights more and do things like that. So I need to be able to make sure we have things at the house, but then I have to be tempted not to eat it because I do love
Yeah.
my potatoes and carbs. So it's really interesting to think about that and how that can work depending on what you're wanting to do. And when you talk about insulin, I want to make sure that people understand what you mean by insulin because me, the first thing I think is the sugars. That's what I'm thinking is the amount of sugars that we're intaking in our body. So can you clarify for everyone when you say make sure you're aware of that insulin and it's not over the top, what are you talking about when we're talking about being aware of the insulin?
Yeah, great question. First of all, insulin is a hormone produced in the pancreas, but literally every single tissue in the body has an insulin receptor. There is no tissue in the body that is not responsive to insulin. And the primary way that people think about insulin is in the context of delivering blood sugar to the cell so that mitochondria can produce energy with it. But insulin has all sorts of different effects in the body. And once we start to appreciate that, we realize, oh, wow, this is really fundamental to our health. So, to get just a little bit technical and talk about a biomarker, which is that there are lifestyle factors, and then there's the actual physiology and the measurable things that you could look at in things like blood tests. If you were to measure someone's insulin when they're fasting, so let's say they eat dinner in the evening, they don't eat again, they go in for a blood draw first thing in the morning. We do that
Mm-hmm.
with all kinds of clients. We have a whole organized process for sorting through biomarkers and writing treatment summaries and helping people figure out at a much more deep, objective level how all this stuff works. So if you do a blood test on something like insulin, optimally, like if you're getting an A plus on that test, your fasting insulin would be about 4 to 6. I see people all the time whose fasting insulin level is more like 50, and
Wow.
they're gaining weight. They can't lose weight because every time insulin goes up, you're gaining weight. That's why diabetics, a long time ago when I was doing long-term care, diabetics hated to go on insulin because they gained about 30 pounds in about a month or two.
Oh, wow.
Insulin is the hormone that triggers us to store, store, store. That's one of its important jobs. And so if your fasting insulin is 50, then you're in storage mode all the time. And it actually means that your body is having to crank out massive amounts of insulin just to try to get your sugars down. Because the body knows if your blood sugar is elevated, you're in serious trouble. And the body, surprisingly, only needs about 1 teaspoon of sugar, of glucose in the entire blood supply to function well. And there's zero dietary requirement for it. You don't have to eat that sugar. If your body doesn't have it from food, it'll synthesize that glucose that you need to be operational.
Interesting.
So the issue with something like type 2 diabetes that's gone up like 30, 40% in the last few decades
Mm-hmm.
is that it's diagnosed as a problem of excess blood sugar, but that's really downstream from the real problem, which is excess insulin. So if you eat a really high carbohydrate diet, your pancreas has to produce a lot of insulin to deliver all that sugar and get it out of the bloodstream so it's not damaging tissues. And so it'll do that, but the next time you eat the same really high carb diet, it has to work a little bit harder because when insulin goes up, sensitivity to it goes down. It's kind of
Oh,
like
wow.
if I scream at your cat, you're going to cover your ears. You downregulate that sensitivity because you're flooded. Same thing with insulin. And so progressively, over sometimes decades of time, the pancreas has to work harder and harder and harder. And meanwhile, if you go to your primary care office and all they're checking is a metabolic panel and they're just looking at your fasting glucose, they see that, oh, you're at 97 and they high five you. Great. You're not a diabetic, but you are gaining some weight. So you need to eat healthy. But what does that actually mean? And can your doctor tell you
Mm-hmm.
that? And and then you don't realize the root cause of the issue is that your fasting insulin might be 40, but you're not even checking it. So you're not seeing that you're working harder and harder and harder just to keep that sugar at a 97. And then eventually, you can't produce enough insulin to keep up, and your pancreas kind of burns out, and then your blood sugar starts to go up. And then primary care tends to say, oh my goodness, you're pre-diabetic or you're diabetic. It doesn't have to be that way. We can go way upstream and recognize these problems early and get better results today. We can feel better today, and we can
Mm-hmm.
prevent all sorts of problems downstream if we'll
Mm.
just check the right things.
Now, I have a question that I know that everybody's going to ask after you just gave all that information. And that question is, great. Okay. Well, so now I need to be checking things that I have zero clue how to check. So does that mean I need to wear one of those things on my arm that monitors my stuff all the time? How am I supposed to know how to do this? What would be your suggestion? Because I know everybody is right. We're all looking for the easy button, and this does take some work. You do need to pay attention, but I think that we also know you need to know how to have the conversation with our primary care doctors or things like that as well. So, what is your suggestion? How do we even get to the point of understanding any of this? Because I don't want to have a thing stuck in my arm to tell me what my insulin levels are.
Yeah. And right now, there's not a continuous insulin monitor. That's coming. That's being worked on.
Ooh.
In the next few years, that will be available. Right now, what you have is a continuous glucose monitor. So that's the little plastic disc that you see in the back
Yep.
of people's arms. So let's unpack that just a little bit because I think it's really valuable, but a tool is only as good as the knowledge that you have about how to use it. And there's an important thing about how to use it. Number one, I would encourage anybody to get a continuous glucose monitor. You can get one from Stilo as a company. I have zero affiliation with Stilo. They just have a product that's available to anybody, and you can go online and they'll ship it to your house, so you don't need a prescription.
Nice.
So, yes, track that so that you can learn what your body does with your sugars in real time. But understand the limitations of that. That's telling you what's going on with your sugars. It's not telling you what's going on with your insulin, and it's
Hmm.
not telling you a lot of other data. So it's a piece of the puzzle. But I think what people want right now is the equivalent of the old adage, hey, if you give someone a fish, they'll eat for a day. If you teach them how to fish, they'll eat for a lifetime.
Yeah.
A lot of people, because information is so ubiquitous now, they say, well, just teach me how to fish. Just teach me how to take care of my body,
Yep.
which I love. I love that enthusiasm. But I'm here to tell you that fishing is a lot easier than physiology and the complexities of the human body. And the more I learn about it, the more I realize how painfully little we know. So instead of being taught how to fish, what people actually need is a guided fishing expedition.
Mm.
People need someone with expert knowledge or a team of professionals who understand these things, who can work with them and give personalized guidance. And there are groups that do that, and mine is one of them. So we have lots of experience doing that kind of thing. If it's interesting to people, we'll tell people later how they can access being able to just log in and say, okay, I got this glucose monitor in my arm. Here's what I'm seeing, but here,
Hmm.
what might I be missing? Insulin's part of it. But let me give you one other interesting side note because you're kind of a science nerd like I am. You love this stuff, and I got to
I
throw this
do.
in. So if you take table sugar, it's part fructose, which is fruit sugar, so
Hmm.
50% fructose and 50% glucose. Now, fructose is metabolized differently than glucose. Fructose is only processed in the liver. And when you start feeding a population really high levels of highly refined fructose with like high fructose corn syrup that's in all these processed foods, then that helps to explain why 40% of the population now has non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And that didn't even exist outside of raging alcoholics back in the 1970s and earlier. Doctors
Wow.
literally never saw fatty liver, and now they see it all the time. That's a fructose problem because we've refined it and we've injected our foods with it to make them hyperpalatable. But why would I say that in the context of this discussion? It's because there's a common mistake that people could make if they're just looking at their glucose monitor. It's not just about the sugar picture because fructose takes longer to break down. And yet, you might argue that it actually does more long term damage. Well, if you drink a sugary beverage, you have a can of soda, and it's
Hmm.
sweetened with all that white stuff, all that sugar, the fructose is going to break down slower. And it might be that the slice of bread that you eat actually spikes your sugars on that glucose monitor higher than the sugary beverage or something with table sugar in it or
Oh,
something with
okay.
more fructose in it. And you might be confused and you might think, oh, the bread's actually worse than the soda. But is that actually true? Not necessarily. It's likely that the soda is far worse, even though it won't spike your sugar quite as much, because now you're getting way too much fructose. Your body metabolizes the glucose from the sugary beverage first. And so you get this little bit of, well, you get a decent sugar spike, but not
Hmm.
as much as from other carbs. But then when it finally gets around to metabolizing the fructose, you don't need that fuel. And so the body says, oh, we need to store it. And it packs it on as fat around the liver and it wrecks you metabolically. So that's a good example that I could kind of pull off the top of my head of
Yeah.
why just wearing the monitor itself is super valuable. It gives you great information, but you need to understand some nuances here, or you might misinterpret it and make some assumptions that are just wrong.
How crazy is that? Like, I have a friend of mine that I know wears one. So, guess where I am going immediately after this? You're about to get a message and be like, "Did you know?" But you are right. We do need to, for especially for those that are looking to do something different, we want to be able to be self-sustaining and help ourselves.
Mhm.
And yet, we don't have all the knowledge behind. And unfortunately, even our primary care doctors are not explaining it in a way that we are going to be aware of it. They're just kind of like, okay, awesome, cool, you're doing that. And then they just move on. But that's also not their job, right? That's not what they're educated
Mhm.
on, where you have a specialty in this area. And that's why it is so important to make sure that you are getting second opinions and you're asking people outside of just your primary care and stuff like that, because that way you get all of the information instead of like a sliver of it. Now, I want to take this and kind of move this into what we were talking about earlier, which was when we were speaking on movement and things like that. Because, yes, this is a huge component of it and being aware of what you are eating and things like that, but also understanding it. Now we have what we attempt to do every single year at the beginning of the year, which is go get that gym membership. So when we talk about being physical or doing certain things that are going to help us cognitively, because right, we know that scrolling and being sedentary, like it is really causing a huge wreck on how our brain functions, not only from just the attention span, but being distracted or brain fog. Brain fog is right, that's like the huge term right now that everybody is using. So kind of give us a little bit of a background in that. If we're now kind of being aware of what we're eating and stuff, what is that other component? What are the things that we need to be aware of or make sure that we're doing so that we understand how it is affecting the body long term?
Yeah, great question. Kat, when it comes to physical activity, I think the place to start for people is to understand why. Because when I was in my 30s and I wanted to drop 30 pounds and I was feeling sluggish and tired, exercise for me was about losing weight. It was about, I want to feel comfortable in my own skin again. And that was the wrong way to go because exercise, especially strength training, does improve metabolic health. It will have an impact, but it won't have nearly as much of an impact as what you eat. But once I realized that I'm exercising primarily because I want a really good heart and I want a really good brain, then things shifted for me. My
Mm,
why was different.
okay.
I understood that number one, when you're exercising, it's releasing a hormone called brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is like miracle grow for brain cells. So that's really impactful. You cannot have a good brain and a good heart without excellent blood flow, and exercise improves blood flow. And it's phenomenally effective at releasing the kinds of neurotransmitters that really support excellent mental health and resilience. Exercise is also a stressor on the body that stimulates the body to turn around and make more and bigger mitochondria, which is the powerhouse of the cell. It's about energy production. And we tend to lose mitochondria as we age. Actually, we lose a lot of mitochondria as we age if we're not doing things to stimulate the body to make more and bigger mitochondria. And physical activity is an excellent thing that we can do to cause that to happen. Exercise also moves lymph through our bodies. The lymphatic system is as extensive as the circulatory system, and it's
Mm-hmm.
like the sewer of the body. But you move it through muscle contractions. And so if you're sedentary all day long, even if you worked out in the morning, you could be in real trouble. The longer you sit, the less sensitive to insulin you are, and the more that your lymphatic system starts to stagnate. So if you get up and you work out for 30 to 60 minutes in the morning, kudos, because a lot of people don't do that. And that will improve your life dramatically. But if you sit all day long, that's called being an active couch potato. It's actually still detrimental that you're sitting so much. So I really encourage people to take exercise snacks. You and I were kind of talking about this earlier.
Yep.
We both do this, and I encourage all of the clients that we work with to do this. Get up once an hour and just take 3 to 5 minutes to move. Do some air squats, do some push ups. I have a spin bike in my office, and I'll jump on it and I'll crank hard for 5, sometimes 10 minutes. If I've got something that I need to read, I was sitting on my bike this morning with a book for 10 minutes, cranking hard on a really high resistance level. It was like I was cranking up a hill, but I was reading a book that I needed to study some things out for a presentation that I'm putting together. It doesn't have to be as hard as we sometimes make it,
Hmm.
but it's important to move. Moving needs to be more the rule than the exception for us if we're going to have really optimal cognitive, mental, and physical health.
And I love that you say that, like exercising first thing in the morning is really great. And there's more that has to be done to that. And we know, or they talk about it a lot. So I hope that that exercising works in that moment, but it's not usually something that lasts all day, right? Even if you're doing hit exercises, high intensity workout, like anything like that. Yes, I get that it does it a little bit longer, but you still need to be doing stuff. But I love that you talk about, making it easier than we think it is. We were talking about this before. I literally work upstairs and my bathroom is like 10 steps down the hall. However, I go down my stairs and into my bathroom in the back of my house just so I can come back up and walk up the stairs. And I do that just because I know that I need to be moving because I am in front of a computer all the time. My desk allows me to sit and stand so that I can stand and I can do stuff. I have a treadmill underneath my desk so that I
Mhm.
can do stuff, so that I can constantly be moving. And it's really interesting how that isn't really talked about. Like they talk about exercising, right? That's in this box for this many minutes. And then like you're good, you're golden. But something that you talked about in the very beginning that I also wanted to bring up as we're kind of getting toward the end, because I want to have time to talk about this, is you were talking about the environment that we are currently in now versus the environments that we used to be in, and how everything that we do and we're around is temperature controlled. And so this is something that a lot of people are talking about right now. And so I want to kind of touch base on this, the cold plunges and the saunas. Now,
Mm.
I do know that both of those have really great benefits to the body. However, I've also heard, especially as a woman, you might need to be more cautious or aware of how you're doing that. And people in general, because if you're throwing yourselves into these high intensity or super cold atmospheres that you are not used to, you could actually be doing a little bit of damage versus actually helping in the way that you should be. So could you touch on that a little bit? Because I feel like this is the new hype thing, is cold plunges and saunas and being aware of, where we're putting ourselves. But it's so great for anxiety and depression. And I'm not knocking that at all. But I do think that there is some science behind that that we need to be aware of.
Yeah. Here again is where people need coaching and guidance. They need the guided fishing expedition. Um, because people have one of the things that we just can't get away from is that we're humans and we have these very human tendencies. And one of them that shows up for a lot of us is to make the mistake of thinking if a little is good, a lot is better. And that
Yeah.
is often not the case. Sometimes little amounts of something are better, or sometimes they're worse. Um, so we have to be thoughtful about that. And when it comes to cold exposure, I think you're absolutely right. There's research increasingly coming out showing that women are very different than men physiologically. Their muscles function differently. Women, yeah, women's bodies benefit from cold exposure, but it probably doesn't need to be near as cold as it does for a man's. For one thing, men typically have more muscle mass. That's a lot more mitochondria to produce a lot more energy and to stimulate. And so I think it's important to recognize that we're all doing our own N of one experiment. You have a unique body. There is no one like you in the universe. And we have to approach each unique human with a degree of reverence that, hey, this is a unique human system, and we need to try things and figure out what works for that individual. So, if I could give any advice, it's be a really good observer of yourself. It's important to stress your body in appropriate ways, but overstressing the body, like super, super cold, because if a little bit of cold is good, then a lot of cold is better. That's no different than overtraining. That is no different than, hey, you've been sedentary for 20 years and you decide it's time to get up off the couch. And the very first thing that you do is try to go run a 5K. I promise you, if you make it that far, all you're going to do is put yourself in a world of hurt. You're going to stress your body by overtaxing it, and it's going to take you some serious time to recover from that. So you don't have to push it that hard.
Yeah. And right, that goes back to what you were saying earlier, is sometimes we try to make things more difficult than it actually is. It's
Mhm.
a lot easier than what we're aware of. And I love that you talk about this because like I said, I know that this is like the thing that everyone is talking about. And it goes back to what we were saying earlier is you have to be aware of who you are as an individual and being aware of how it affects your body and not everybody else's. I know that for me, I can handle certain amounts of cold, but jumping into super cold thing, like it literally shocks my body to the point to where everything feels like it's shutting down. I don't see how that's good for me. So when I do anything like that, and cold plunges is something I've been looking at adding into my routine, I have heard, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, that especially for women, being around that 55 to 60 degrees is actually good for us. That's good enough. I don't have to be 32 degrees, which is wonderful because I don't want to put ice cubes in it when I have to jump in. So, and which was really interesting because I was like, okay, well, that's strange to me. That feels warm. But I think about it when I jump into rivers and stuff that are 55, 60 degrees, that stuff's cold. So you really
Mhm.
are still getting something. And I think that that is just something that we need to be aware of, like you said. It doesn't necessarily have to be an extreme. You're just trying to help your body in these little areas, and that includes everything that we've kind of talked about today, but being aware of, like you said, more isn't always better.
Yeah. Um, I agree with what you've said, and everything that I've read and the research that I've seen would support even kind of the temperature range that you were talking about for a lot of women. Again, it's an N of one experiment, but I would also encourage you to focus on what's the principle at work? Why am I doing this? If you understand that energy production requires really good mitochondrial health, and a lot of the diseases that we have nowadays are evidence of mitochondrial dysfunction and not having cells that are producing really good energy. Once you understand that, you can ask yourself, well, what do I want to do to stimulate the body to become more resilient, to produce more and better mitochondria? Well, you have to have hormetic stressors. Hormesis is a stress that causes the body to respond by being more resilient. Well, yes, heat exposure will do that. Yes, cold exposure will do that. But those aren't the only things on the list. Being out in the sun and having some ultraviolet light hitting you in an appropriate dose where you're not frying yourself, but you're stressing the body a little bit like that. That will
Hmm.
upregulate antioxidants. Doing hypoxic breathing exercises where you're holding your breath or you're blowing off all of your air, you're evacuating CO2 out of your system, and then you're holding your breath and you're going for a lot longer period. That low level of oxygen in the body will stimulate the body to make more and bigger mitochondria. And there's plenty of other things that we could add to the list, things that stimulate the vagus nerve as well. And if you're looking at those things and you're saying, well, what's my goal? And what works well for me, it might lead you to say, cold plunges are not something that I'm actually going to stick with. I'm not likely to do that long term. I'm not naturally motivated to do it. But when I do those breath exercises, I just feel amazing after that.
Hmm.
Great. That's probably more your speed and something that you need to stick with and prioritize. And this is kind of along the lines of how my business partner, Randy, our chief medical officer, answers the question, Randy, what's the best kind of exercise to do? He just grins at people and he says, whatever you will stick with consistently, because being sedentary is the biggest problem. So let's
Yeah.
start with that. And even though you could argue the benefits of strength training and maintaining muscle mass versus cardiovascular exercise and how I think it would be really valuable to do both. I still like where Randy goes with it, which is what are you going to stick with and be consistent with?
Hmm.
And I think that's a good place for a lot of people to start.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. And I want to make sure too, as we're talking about all this, I know that people's brains are just going and they're wanting to say, okay, well then how do I learn more? How do I even figure out what is going on with my body? What is going on with my brain? How do I even know where I am at now so that I can make a plan to get to where I want to be? So I know that you have some amazing freebies for the audience. I want you to talk a little bit about both of them. Yes, people, we have two for you guys to be able to check out so that we can touch base on both pieces that we hit on today. So I'll let you, Eric, tell us a little bit about each one of those.
Yeah, thank you, Kat. So I'm really excited about this because we're on a mission to help as many millions of people as quickly as possible as we can because people No one will ever care about your body as much as you do. And people need that guided fishing expedition that I was talking about. They need a safe place where they can come, they can ask questions, and people that have the expertise to say, here's what the research actually says, but here's how you might apply it in your own individual situation. And there's not a one size fits all. So we put together a very robust online membership site. We have an amazing community of people that come together and can learn. And we have online office hours multiple times a week with myself and a team of experts that we've put together where people can literally log in just like you would go to a college professor's office hours and you can say, hey, I got a question about this glucose monitor that I'm wearing, or I just got some labs done at my doctor's office. Can you explain them to me? What do these things mean? So we have that available, and then we do regular master classes where we take a deep dive on topics that people want to know about. Like recently, people were saying, I'm hearing a lot of stuff about nicotine and research on nicotine and Parkinson's disease.
Mm.
Is that even legit? Well, our medical director did a deep dive into that science, talked about the research, talked about times where it might apply, times when it might not apply, what the strengths are and what the weaknesses are in the research, explained it all in layman's terms. And it was really valuable to our community. So for listeners of this podcast, Kat, we've made it possible for people to join the membership for free for 30 days to just poke around and look at all the content. There's hundreds of hours of recordings in there that they could even look at. And it's searchable, lots of tools and resources. So just go to amindforallseasons.com/join and use the promo code LOTUS, LOTUS, just like this podcast, or just like the name of your business. So put that in there and you can get 30 days free. And after that, it's $25 a month. We try to make it as affordable as humanly possible to come get expert information. I also worked with my team recently to put together a free brain health or brain energy self-assessment. So you can go online and in about 10 minutes, you can take this survey that goes through lifestyle factors, symptom questions, and some biomarker questions. And you can find out a little bit more about the status of your brain health. And you can learn a lot in the process about what could help you improve. And if you want to do that, go to amindforallseasons.com/energy. And it's totally free for anybody that wants to take that self-assessment. So I'm excited that we can offer this to the listeners and they can hear a lot more conversation than you and I have time to have in one
Oh my
podcast.
gosh. And you can dive into whatever it is that piques your interest. I am so excited about this. I can't thank you enough, Eric, for offering this to everyone that's listening to the podcast. I myself am going to take that brain assessment. So, like, just so everybody knows, that is on my to-do list. But the other thing I want to let everyone know is we will make sure we have the links and the codes and everything that will be inside the show notes. We'll make it super easy for you to find that information. If you're wanting to dive deeper, Eric, I know that you have a full protocol that people can go through as well. So do us all a favor. Tell everybody how they can find you, how they can follow you, and how can they learn more.
Yeah, the best place to learn more is to just go to our website, amindforallseasons.com. I'm also on all the major social media channels as Eric D. Collett, Collett. So those are good places to get more resources. We've got a free newsletter that we put out every week with lots of great information. There's lots of things that are free or low barrier to entry or full protocol that's really affordable to get an extensive panel of blood work, get expert guidance, get a one-on-one review, get the user manual to your body kind of a thing. So we hope there's something there for everybody that helps them live a healthier life with excellent cognitive and mental health.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Eric. Any last words that you'd like to leave the audience with?
Hmm. Yeah, I think I'll share a bit of wisdom from a client that I worked with a few years ago who had really severe cognitive and mental health problems. I mean, she had brain fog, she was depressed, she was suicidal, and it was horrible for her to go through that. But as she recovered, and as we identified the root cause issues with untreated post-concussion syndrome and hormonal wonkiness, and she even had herpes simplex virus that would flare, and that virus can get up into the brain if you have a leaky blood-brain barrier, and that was kind of affecting her. And at one point, she was doing a little bit better, but still struggling, but she was handling it better. And she said something that was so profound. I want to leave it with everybody here. She said, I said, I noticed that you're not so thrown off by what's going on and by this flare of your symptoms. How did you get to that point that it's not bothering you so much? And she said, well, now I've come to recognize that what I'm experiencing are just symptoms. And I have learned not to confuse what I feel with who I am. I have learned that my feelings are because of my physiology, because I've got hormones and neurotransmitters and everything going on in my body. And they're real, but I don't have to like them, and I don't need to confuse what I feel with my identity. That was profound, and I think it's one of the most important things I could probably share with anybody. Don't confuse what you feel with who you are.
Oh my gosh, Eric, that is amazing. I love that. And I love that her taking that step and working with you guys is what led her to start seeing that. And I do think that, we as individuals do get really caught up in our feelings. And they last about 90 seconds unless you keep laying into it. So thank you for that. That is absolutely beautiful. I love that.
You're welcome.
So, to everybody else out there, I hope that you were taking notes. You should have like pages full. If not, you should go back and re-listen to this. You definitely need to make sure that you jump on both of those freebies that Eric has put out for you guys. This is absolutely amazing. And I know that we're really moving into a space where we want to take better care of ourselves. We want to understand more. And I agree with Eric, like he said in the beginning, not only do we need to hear what people are saying, but we need to also be aware and have that fishing guide and not just go out and try to figure out fishing on our own. I am 100% behind this. So Eric, again, I cannot thank you enough for being a part of the podcast today. To everybody else out there, do one thing positive for someone each and every day and see the difference that it makes in your life. Catch you later. Thank you so much for tuning in to Real Chat with Kat today, where real stories meet real solutions. If you loved today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave us a review on Apple, and share this with someone who may also need to hear this as well. Let's also keep the conversation going. Follow me on socials at The Lotus Effect, connect with our incredible guests, and remember, you are never alone. Your story matters, and you have the ability and the power to rewrite it. You always have a choice. Until next time, stay strong, stay inspired, and keep showing up as the incredible, unstoppable